simply ridding society of killers that would be caught and sentenced anyway if our courts worked properly. We began with the criminals that the people know, so that our actions would be understood. It's not just a question of whether or not to use violence. There simply is no other way, Inspector. You, of all people, should understand that. Either you're for us or you're against us. I'm afraid you've misjudged me.
Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock Blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone, and we are continuing to hold down the fort with the second Dirty Harry movie, Magnum Force. This is a 1973 film directed by Ted Post. The screenplay is by John Milius and Michael, I think it's Cimino. I'm not quite sure how his name is pronounced, so if I got it wrong, I apologize. Adam can correct me if he happens to know. And
I'm not going to correct you.
Okay. So the plot of this movie is Inspector Dirty Harry Callahan is on the trail of a vigilante police force who are not above going beyond the law to kill the city's undesirables. Again, it's Clint Eastwood playing Dirty Harry, and this time around we have Hal Holbrook as the lieutenant, and we have a number of new rookie officers in the mix, and they introduce a new partner for Harry, as well as a new love interest and a new best friend, kind of, that I don't think was in the first movie, unless he made a very brief appearance and like they expanded on the character. But I don't recall him coming up.
I was wondering too. I was like, does he show up in an office scene and they like say hi to each other? Was he somehow? I couldn't actually place this character.
Yeah, I mean, because they have other characters that are more established. You know what I mean? So like what is it, DiGiorgio and people like that. But yeah. So, anyways, the basic plot is almost a spin-off of the first Dirty Harry, where he gets into vigilante territory, and this movie presents Harry dealing with a vigilante force within the police force, which I think is based off of, they mention it in the movie, but I think it was actually, the script was based off of the Brazilian death squads that, those were the things that inspired the concept. And so he's, it's sort of a they're sort of moving the character in a different direction, I would say. I don't know if you would agree with that, Adam.
Yeah, there's definitely some attempts to reframe things in this movie, and it's
So I don't know. Yeah. What did you think of it?
I would say I enjoyed the movie. First of all, it's a solid, kind of action thriller type movie. But it's definitely a case where you can feel they're turning it from a single movie into a franchise. Basically, you can feel these formulaic elements. You mentioned, Hal Holbrook. It's like in the first movie, he butts heads with his superiors a lot, but it feels like they're their own people. It's like you understand where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with them. They're either just doing their job or whatever. There's even some sympathy from his superiors towards him. They're like, they kind of understand what he's doing, but they're like, you can't do this. Whereas, Hal Holbrook is just boom. He's the hard ass superior who's going to crack down on our hero. Yeah. And like, that's it. At least for, obviously there's more going on than that, but which only makes it make less sense the deeper you get it. But I mean, elements like that felt, and also just the idea of, well, Harry's this vigilante and people aren't sure if he's good or not. How about if we make some really bad vigilantes so he doesn't look so bad?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I don't think that they really handled it that well. It's an interesting idea, and I think they could have, if they'd hit it out of the park, this movie would be as good as the first movie. But it felt like they came up with the idea, but never quite really really figured out a way to make it into something dramatic in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, so I do enjoy this movie, but I think there's a lot of warranted criticisms of the film. Like, it's
Yeah.
not, like I said, the first Dirty Harry movie is a really solid, good movie that's well crafted.
Yes, I
And
agree completely.
and it's tight, and like the themes are tight. Like, you don't question the themes. This one, you watch it and you're like, wait, if this is the theme, what is it? Sort of doesn't make a lot of sense, and it feels like there's more cooks involved in this one, maybe. And
I think that is definitely part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like they came up with and apparently that's the case. I mean, Milius, who I think we mentioned in the last podcast, wrote this, and John Milius apparently had a much more concrete thing he was doing, and he was very unhappy with the final result of the movie. Well, so,
and I guess there's also a lot of confusion. Like, Ted Post directed it, but there's a lot of rumor when and again, it was very much rumor. It wasn't anything that I was able to find concrete information on, but I heard it from a lot of people when I was digging into this film that Clint Eastwood either did a lot of directing or had a lot of creative control, and that might have caught. You know what I mean? Because
I came across anecdotes on that too. Yeah.
Because I guess in the first Dirty Harry movie, Clint Eastwood didn't want him to throw the badge. He wanted him to think about throwing it and then putting it back, because he wanted the character to be able to go on. And they eventually talked him into the idea of throwing the badge, which without that, the movie loses a tremendous amount. So I feel like maybe there was less clashing with the director here that there might have been going on with Siegel, and Siegel had more of a concrete vision, and this maybe I don't know. I don't want to say.
I definitely agree. It feels like the director didn't have a concrete vision because basically he kind of let all these elements just kind of sit where they sat, and that was it. But yeah, as far as Eastwood goes, I know the whole girl downstairs who seduces him thing was an Eastwood edition.
Well, what's fun,
which apparently Milius, I think it was Milius really hated it, because he was like, he's this lonely, bitter man, and giving him these groupies, it just ruins the character completely.
I think so. Here's my thinking on that. I feel like if this was like a tight and airtight sequel and there were no other Dirty Harry movies, I feel like that would make sense. Like, you wouldn't want him to have a love interest. I feel like because they do turn it into a movie series where it's more in the domain of like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and stuff like that at this point. I'm pretty okay with it. I also think it's kind of interesting because so much of this movie is a response to the criticisms of the first movie. So it's like, well, Dirty Harry is regressive. He's this, he's that. It's like, no, he's into free love. He's willing to have interracial relationships. He is totally against this fascist development within the police force that wants to just, go around executing criminals, that have been, released by the justice system. So it's interesting. It's for all of the critiques that I think are valid of it, there's something really glorious about the movie when you watch it, where it's just like a time capsule of a film. Do you know what I mean? Where like,
it is. I was thinking about all those things watching it. I mean, you really can see the social developments of the time kind of pushing on this script. It's like people act like it's something new, that like, all these political things are affecting movies. It's like, no, it's true all through history. But it's just different forces at work.
Yeah, though I do think there's something about the way they were handled in these time periods where I don't get, like, sometimes when I see a modern movie, the political message is a little too it's the main course. And with the Dirty Harry movie, it's in there, but there's a yarn that's the main course.
This isn't. Basically, that's why none of these things really matter. Because basically, Ted Post wanted to make kind of an action thriller cop movie, and everything else is just there. That's why it doesn't fit together well, because he didn't even care about that part.
And I think the other thing too is it's such a confused political message at this point in the series.
It doesn't make any sense.
But what's great is as the series goes on, you kind of it's sort of like. What it really becomes, I think, is how are we going to fit this character into this moment in history? Like, that's sort of the problem that they're addressing in each movie. And every movie, different regressions of the character emerge and different like advancements of the character emerge, and it's kind of interesting to watch.
So it's a little like James Bond over the years, where they have to play with him every now and then.
Though I think James Bond has done a pretty. I mean, maybe I haven't seen the more recent movies, but I feel like James Bond has stayed James Bond, like in terms of. I don't think I've ever seen the man use a condom. Do you know what I mean? Like things like that. Like
I don't know. I haven't seen any since Casino Royale. So
that was the last one
I
saw. That was the last one I saw. Oh, wait, I saw Skyfall. I did see Skyfall.
Okay. I'm not a huge James Bond fan, so it's like I watched a lot of them when I was a kid, but as an adult, I watched barely any of them. So I really don't have a good feeling on what they're doing with it now.
I feel like I feel like Dirty Harry is actually a more progressive character than James Bond in a lot of ways, because James Bond. I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like James Bond has stayed very the same from beginning to end.
I would agree, based purely on these couple of movies. Well, I mean, one difference too is that James Bond doesn't really have any kind of agenda at all rather than doing his job. It's like he's an agent. That's what he is. He's this weapon that goes in and does things. And whereas the fact is, Dirty Harry's whole conflict is that he isn't just a cop who's just going to do what his superiors tell him, and that's where everything comes from. So it's a fundamental difference there.
But like I said, the last episode, the way I would put it is the first movie is this great film, and the series of films, starting with Magnum Force, is where it just becomes kind of a fun, entertaining series.
And that's how I took it. You prepared me for that. So I just went in for the ride. It's a good ride. All these things were running through my mind watching the movie, but not in the way where it was ruining it. I'm just kind of filing things away. But
I think a perfect scene for that is the Charlie McCoy scene when he meets his friend Charlie McCoy, who we didn't know he was friends with for so long, but we learned this in this, and he gets out of the car and he's just fuming about it's like overacting, number one, but it's also like delicious overacting. Like it was just he almost reminded me of Bryan Cranston. When he was in that moment. Do you know what I mean? There was something about that where he was this bitter, angry man that, is going through a midlife crisis and he's kind of a decoy because we're supposed to think that he's the one committing these murders, and it turns out to be these young rookies that are all basically Dirty Harry fans. So there's it's also one of the first movies. I mean, it might not be one of the first movies, but it's one of the first movies I'm aware of where it's that meta about we're actually going to these rookies are a stand-in for Dirty Harry fans. Do you know what I mean?
It is. I instantly suspected them. That just hit me right. But obviously, I was tipped off to the fact there was going to be a squad of some kind. And I thought, oh, these guys must be the squad of. So that plus we already knew at that point there were people in police uniforms doing this, so it kind of came together for me. Not that it ruined the movie in any way. It's not like it's a big whodunit or anything, so it didn't.
Well, what's funny? Movies before the age of spoilers, it doesn't matter if the surprise is. It's not like the surprise is the point. It
depends. Yeah. It depends, to be honest. I'd say there are old movies where I think being spoiled on them does affect your enjoyment.
Well, I guess like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or Carnival of Lost Souls, you kind of need to be surprised by, but what I mean is...
I guess the question, do you need to, or does it enhance the movie? Like Psycho, you can know the spoilers, both big spoilers in the movie, but if you don't, it's really great if you actually get to be surprised by those.
But also I guess what I'm saying is there are movies that there are movies that came out after a certain period where we do not reveal what happened in those movies so we don't spoil them for people. But growing up, I knew before I was even able to speak the twist in Psycho. Do you know what I mean? Just that was just
me too. My mother is a movie buff who loves to tell people the endings of movies. So it's I knew basically by the time I was 3, I knew the ending of every movie made before 1975. But
and this is a movie where it would be maybe more interesting if you didn't know and if you didn't have information going in to see how thrown off you are, because they do. I mean, if you just look at it in terms of the placement of things, they do a good job of having Charlie McCoy, the decoy, be like, he's a patrolman just like them. He's a traffic cop that drives a motorcycle, and they establish that he like wants to go around murdering criminals. So they do all this stuff to set him up as the guy. But then by the time we get to the scene where he gets killed, it's crystal clear that that's not the case. And even before then, it's pretty obvious that something else is afoot. But yeah, so I don't. What about the Hal Holbrook character? Because you had mentioned it is a little bit weird that he's kind of like it's sort of become a staple in the genre where like the lieutenant or the captain is like sometimes for no reason at all, just kind of against the rogue cop like hero. Do you know what I mean? Like even if the rogue cop is like doing everything he's supposed to do, there's tension between those two characters. But here it feels when you first start watching the movie like the tension comes out of nowhere, because in the previous film all of his superiors were at least like it was a more plausible type of scenario where they weren't diametrically opposed to him for whatever reason. And this character is just right out of the bat. He's sort of presented as somebody who never used his gun in duty. He's probably somebody that doesn't believe in violence and that sort of thing. He's probably the opposite of Dirty Harry. And so that is what initially explains the conflict between them. But then it turns out he's actually in charge of this whole death squad. And so
and you wonder why was he opposed to Harry? Why didn't he try to recruit Harry? Why wasn't he all these questions just arise. It just doesn't.
Well, and they did try.
It feels like separate drafts. Like it does, going back to the multiple writers thing. It feels like at some point they had the hard-ass lieutenant who was just an obstacle, not the bad guy. And then they forgot to change his dialogue after they decided, let's make him the head of the squad.
Though I will say, if you watch Hal Holbrook's performance, it will be obvious that what's going, like you can see in his performance that his character is aware of what he's doing the whole time. You know what I mean?
He tips his hand with his performance, definitely. Which I mean, it could be taken as good or bad, but he does give the game away to an extent.
And they do try to recruit him, but it's so brief. Like there's that scene in the parking garage, which I guess is the recruitment
but that
scene.
once again, that was after these guys hated him and been a jerk to him for just like he like when he was forming the squad, he would like Harry would be a guy we would approach and go, "Hey, we're looking to get tougher on crime here."
Here's what I've come up with. Here's my theory.
Okay. Brendan's headcanon corner.
Well, this isn't like a crazy theory. This is pretty middle of the road, I think. But my thinking is he didn't know if he could trust Harry because he knew Harry's history probably. He knew about him, but maybe he didn't know how far Harry would be willing to go. But he might have taken inspiration from Harry and used that to assemble the Death Squad, but continued to behave that way towards Harry in order to throw off any suspicion of what he was doing. Do you know what I mean? It was sort of like he protested too much type thing. Is what I was thinking.
Yeah, you could go with that. But I don't know. It's one of those things. Like what you're saying makes sense, and it could be a one, but I feel like it's not a very good dramatic.
It definitely
thing,
feels.
You know?
The problem with that theory is, even though that theory makes sense, it's never explicitly stated that that's what he's doing, and you have to think about it at least one minor. Like it's not immediately apparent that that's what he's doing. So But my guess is that is what is supposed to be the case.
I feel like if you put the screenplay had gone through one more good draft, I feel like you could have made an interesting conflict, friendship, relationship with those two characters going through the whole movie that would have made the ending more interesting. Because that's the other. Because this guy is just played as a villain on every level through the whole movie. It's not. There's nothing sympathetic about this guy, or even really all that. I mean, and I feel like it sounds like I'm attacking Holbrook's performance because he does fine in it, but he's not an interesting character really. And
he's a foil. He's a foil for Dirty Harry.
Yeah, he's purely a foil. As opposed to the first movie where the villain is amazing and he's really not sympathetic in any way. I want to steer away from sympathetic, but he's really fascinating. It
Yeah,
really holds your
and he's filled
attention.
with contradictions and all kinds of things. Like there's just
Yeah.
there's a mystery to him, and the Hallbrook character. I mean, I won't say I think he's an interesting villain, but he's a very bureaucratic villain, and so it's
Hmm.
you know what I mean. It's not. It's a very the thing that makes him work is the energy he gives to the film by being in opposition to Dirty Harry. And it's a very
Hmm.
simple device. It's not
Yeah.
as good. It's definitely not as good as the relationship between Dirty Harry and Scorpio in the first movie.
Yeah.
But I think it's also a kind of a natural byproduct of the type of thing they're doing, where there's not just in the first movie there was one villain, and this one there's multiple villains. There's multiple bad guys,
Yeah.
and it's more of an idea than a person. Do you know what I mean? It's more of like a
Hmm.
and like because I was thinking about it, if they had fleshed out the Hallbrook character more, that might have been interesting. But this is like the longest Dirty Harry movie there is, and
Oh,
I
really?
don't. Yeah, and I don't. I feel like the movie would have dragged if we got more information. Like because like what's motivating Hall? Like did somebody murder his family? Like what happened to make this guy, who I'm assuming was kind of like a liberal, you know, let the system work type of person. At least that's what we're
Yeah.
presented with initially. That's obviously a part of who he is. But
Yeah.
he suddenly made this pivot into things have gotten too chaotic, and we need to you know I do really want to know why that's the case with that character, because there's
Well,
never any glimmer of what the reason is.
that I mean, yeah, that's a good part. Like with me talking about like Harry and Holbrook's character having more of a connection to the movie. If they had given them more of an actual philosophical conflict or something, you could have given Harry a chance to define
Yeah,
more specifically what the line too far was. Whereas as he's just as we only get like him finding out about it being too far, whatever. I feel like they could have flirted with the idea. We should have wondered at some point in the movie, was Harry going to join up with these people? I mean, we're
yeah.
talking about an entirely different movie, but once you're rewriting the movie, you're kind of going beyond
Well,
reviewing. But I just feel like that's what would have made this movie more than just a solid cop movie.
yeah. No, and I agree. And I think again, one of the problems with the movie is because it's so long and it has so many parts in it and so many pieces. Like when
Hmm.
I sit down and think, well, how would I rewrite? Like one thought I had was you could get rid of the Charlie McCoy character and kind of fuse that with the Hallbrook character and make
Uh
them
huh.
long, like established friends and some,
Yeah.
where you can get some of the Hallbrook backstory in the scene where Harry goes to his wife and what, you know what I mean? And, uh, but again, there's so much in the movie that it feels like that would be complicated to do. Do you know what I mean? Like those kind of. I feel like this is much
Yeah.
more in schlocky territory, and it just kind of has to reside there. It's
Yeah.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, you have to clean up a lot with this movie to elevate it.
Yeah,
But because I'm like one of the other issues that makes it feel cluttered. Like I already brought up the neighbor that he sleeps with, and it's weird because you have the thing with Charlie's wife and kind of the flirtation with
yeah.
that, and then her moving and kind of leaving him.
Well,
But it feels like if the neighbor character wasn't in it, that would be more resonant because
yes.
he's this lonely guy. And this was kind of his one fleeting chance. But the fact they kind of threw in this other
He's
girl who's throwing himself at him, it's like, well,
and
why does it?
they're all hitting on him. They're all coming on
Yeah,
to him. What's funny
and
is
yeah. So I
well,
feel like those are from different writers in different drafts that kind of got hedged together there.
I've wondered about that too. I think it's either that or it's like there was supposed to be a theme and those were supposed to connect somehow and they never quite connected. Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's because like I guess like you were saying, like the reason why that neighbor is in there is because of Clint Eastwood, and I guess the reason Clint
Yeah.
Eastwood wanted to do it was he was getting letters. One story I heard is that actually a lot of letters were coming from fans in Asia, so it was a lot of Asian female fans writing to Clint Eastwood saying they wanted him to have a love interest, but they wanted the woman
Yeah.
to come on to him,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I
and
read the
so
same thing.
yeah,
So yeah.
and so that's why they have the woman who's an Asian character come on to him. But I think it's also why Charlie McCoy's wife comes on to him. But also even the character, even like the scene when he's disarming the mailbox,
Mm-hmm.
And there's the guy that comes downstairs who I think is gay. He seems to be a gay character. I'm not 100%
Yeah,
sure.
I think that was what they were going for.
But he invokes the same line that the lady next door invoked, where he says, "Oh, the cop upstairs." And I realized watching it this time, he was kind of flirting with Harry when he said
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I
And
definitely saw
yeah.
that. That's how I took it.
So I think this is a movie where they have the gay neighbor, the lady neighbor, and his friend's wife, all coming on to him, and it's a little bit like you said. On the one hand, it sort of goes against the whole it does something to the lonely character. On the other hand, it's very interesting. It's like it's
fine in of itself.
Yeah.
It's just that having those two things together, it's like if they wanted to go that direction, the other plot line they should have just jettisoned that. It's like, or not completely jettisoned, but at least taken the romantic element out of that, because it just doesn't land with this other stuff going on in the movie.
So, and I will say this: I did like the relationship between him and the neighbor. I thought that was good.
There was nothing in of itself. There's nothing wrong with those scenes. They're fine. It's just in the context of the larger movie they become an issue.
But in terms of a series, is where I think it makes sense, because if the only problem is, I mean, spoilers. That lady is not in the next movie. I'm assuming the bomb situation frightened her away and from being involved in cops. But she's not in the next movie. I thought if they had continued with her in the next movie, that would have been, for me, that would have justified more of what we see of her in this film, if that makes sense, because then you'd have like this relationship that plays out over the course of the series. But it's a little bit more like James Bond, where it's like a new woman every thing,
every franchise did that back in those days. Used to but even through the 80s pretty much.
But also I think it's, again, this is a movie where I feel like they're trying to establish that Dirty Harry is a much more evolved guy than people would assume.
Everything. Everything. I mean, they're clearly setting this up to be an ongoing franchise. It's not just how can we get a sequel out of this? How can we reshape this whole engine into being something we can get another, how many movies did they get out of it? 5? But
they got 5 movies, but a lot of people don't count the 5th movie as a proper Dirty Harry film.
Okay.
And with good reason, I would say, with good reason. But even that, like in its disastrous nature, is kind of glorious to watch. It's a similar type of thing where it's
the Karate Kid 3.
That's a good comparison. Well, I don't even know if I could. There's some really weird stuff in the last Dirty Harry movie that will leave you scratching your head. But you will not forget that you saw it. It's that kind of thing.
You're really pushing hard for more continue the series.
Well, here's what I'll say. The next movie in the series is actually barring the first one, is actually my favorite. I like the third one the best.
No, I want to continue with it. I'm just joking. I have no reluctance about continuing this. It's a really interesting series to look back on.
But they established that he is willing to have interracial relationship. He's willing to have free love. That he's not a vigilante. That's like very clear. Like, he is not a vigilante in this movie, even though he's a vigilante in the first movie. I guess he's like a quasi vigilante. You know what it is? He has his own moral compass, and his moral compass is supposed to be true north, I think, and that which is sort of what a vigilante is, but which is why but I don't know.
He's the vigilante with a heart of gold.
Yeah, he's like the vigilante that knows the mind of God. I think that's, you know what I mean? It's like that kind of a thing where it's like he's the one vigilante that's always right. That's kind of how they're positioning him in this movie.
Basically, the message of this movie: it's okay for a guy to use his personal worldview to be a vigilante, but once you start institutionalizing it, it just turns sour. It's like you can't have these teams of vigilantes. It's like you've lost the soul of it. It's like corporate vigilantism.
And I guess in fairness, what they're doing is they are going a step beyond what he did, which was he's sort of taking these decision points to himself during the. But this is like you said, it's very institutionalized. They also establish he doesn't like. There's a line in there where he says, "I don't care if the whole damn department is queer as long as they can shoot straight." And he uses that's like the language they use from the time. But like he's basically there's a scene where they're talking about the new rookie cops, and his partner says, "Oh, I went through the police academy with them," and everybody thought that they were gay basically because they were always together.
Yeah.
And but what I read from that line is they're basically saying, "Hey, Dirty Harry's also okay with people being gay or whatever. All he cares about is if they can do their job, basically." So there's all these little things.
There was a lot of deliberate points where you could feel him kind of, we're going to check off this little box here, just in case you were worried.
Yeah.
It's,
So it's kind of I feel like, and again, if we continue with this, you'll see that they sometimes undermine all of the efforts they make in movies like this. But it feels like they're trying to sort of do damage control with the character and restore the character to something that's a little bit more heroic, maybe. Or But I mean, he still is Dirty Harry. Like, he still has those rough edges. But I would say he's a little bit more. He's sort of like, like in Lethal Weapon. In the first Lethal Weapon movie, Riggs is like this suicidal character that's really dark. And by the second movie, he's more goofy than anything else.
Yeah.
He's a maverick. He's more like Tom Cruise.
The first one he is crazy, and the second one he's comedy crazy.
Yeah. He's the wild guy at the party in the second movie.
Yeah.
And we get something a little bit similar here, where Dirty Harry he's still gritty and still rough around the edges and bristles at authority, but he's comfortably part of the system. He doesn't. We don't have any more of those scenes where he says the law is crazy, or where he displays just complete ignorance of the law, and you know what I mean. It's a very different type of character, and also we just see more of him doing the things that he needs to do in order to be a good cop. We see him like training at the shooting range. We see him interacting with other police officers. We see him checking in on Charles McCoy's family to see what's going on with Charlie McCoy when he realizes he's possibly unhinged. So he's a more stable character in this film.
The whole shooting competition thing, it was just like, that felt like a really un-Harry like thing to participate in. Just like the guy from the first movie feel like, this is a game, I'm not gonna go play some dumb shooting game, get my shooting practice on the streets.
Well, that was the funny thing, because you don't imagine, like, the Dirty Harry in the first movie, I don't think he cares about trophies and prizes, right? Like, it just doesn't seem like it would be his thing.
I didn't see him caring at all.
And in this one, it all had the feel of like a soccer game from elementary school. Do you know what I mean? It was just very
it was strange.
And I think the whole purpose, obviously they did that so he could get the slug to match against the thing, and also so they could have that scene where he shoots, where they have the bullseye segment of the competition, and they have like the little cardboard cutouts of people coming out, and he shoots the cop at the very end. And the person's like, "Hey, that's the good guy," and he doesn't say anything. So it's like he obviously did it on purpose. But
it's it was interesting, actually, when the first shooting range scene came up, the one where he meets all the guys in the squad. It's like, when he shows up there and he's like, "Oh, I didn't think there'd be anyone else here." I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Harry would show up when no one else is there. And it's like, "I like to come here late to practice for the competition." I was like, "Wait, what?" It was kind of funny, because I was like, and it just went from being completely in character to what is happening.
And then we find out that he's like an institution at the competition, that he's won like every year. And it really softens the character. And again, maybe that is a good thing for the series, but it takes away from the first movie. He was such a dark character, and it was and it's also, did you notice, like, I feel like after the first movie the hair never quite looks right. Like in the first film, his hair has a certain look. He's almost got like a Wolverine type hairdo going on. Maybe it's they were using Technicolor and now they're not using Technicolor, I don't know, but I feel like in every subsequent film the hair just never quite looks right compared to the first movie.
I didn't think about his hair as much. So
Here's one thing I'll say: if you like, if you want to see like glorious heads of hair, '70s cop movies are the place to like. There's something about
Yeah, no,
'70s
the
movies.
hair is good. I didn't think of it on that level. I
Yeah.
agree with you on the fantastic
When you get a
nature of the
chance
hair, but
between this and the next film, go and look at like some stills of of the first movie and compare them to
okay.
this one, and just tell me if you think I'm crazy or not. For I just feel like there's
Oh, I'll
something
tell
off.
you.
Yeah, I feel like his hair was even more red in the first movie, and in this one, it's more of like a dun color. It's just I don't know, something feels off about the hair. Um,
Yeah, I mean the color there probably is a color difference. I mean, it wouldn't.
But we also get another scene of him eating all American food right before he uh, puts a bad guy away. And this time it's a so in the first movie it was a bank robbery while he's eating a hot dog, and in this movie he's eating a hamburger and he has to stop terrorists from taking over a plane. It's got nothing to do with the plot of the movie, but it's just a moment in the film where we get
Yeah.
to see him being Dirty Harry. I don't know. What did you think of that
Well, it felt
sequence?
very, very much like the kind of scene that they were evoking in the Naked Gun movies to me. It was just
Yeah,
this random, oh, I'm on the scene. I'm
yeah,
going to do something because I'm a cop.
yeah.
Yeah, it just felt like Frank Drebin should be doing this, but it all would go bad. But yeah, the other thing, I mean, yeah, the food thing, having him have the burger in his hand and stuff. It really added to that. We're making a series now.
Yeah,
What's Harry's trademark thing? And from the first movie, he's a guy who eats food.
yeah.
We're gonna have him eat food in every movie because they even have a comment from his partner later in the movie. It's like, what even are I forget what the comment was now, but
Oh, it was
something
like,
about
how
his
can you eat?
appetite.
How can you eat
Yeah.
after
Well,
watching that?
actually, no, there was more than that. There was another comment later in the movie too about where he's kidding him about how he likes to eat all the
Mm.
time, but I've forgotten the actual dialogue.
But yeah,
But yeah,
it is definitely a thing, and it's also like the bank robbery scene was so quick because it was a bank robbery, but in this one he has to actually
yeah,
get on the plane. He's got to trick the terrorists, and then he's got to confront them. So it's like a sync. It takes like 10 or 15 minutes just to get through this like one little beat that's a reference to a smaller beat in the first movie.
yeah,
I did
yeah.
like how they had him shoot the guy through the wall. I thought that was a clever moment. I liked that part of the
That
sequence.
actually, I really like that shot.
Yeah.
I think that was almost directly done that way in Miller's Crossing. There's the scene where he shoots the guy
Yeah.
through the wall at Miller's Crossing, and I was like, "Wow, I've never known where that came from. That's got to be a reference."
And the
So,
guy looks like Ron Jeremy that he shoots too. It's not Ron Jeremy, but it looks just like Ron Jeremy. It's so much so that when I did my little Dirty Harry review over the summer, I actually
Mhm.
looked up if Ron Jeremy was in this movie because I was like, oh, it could have been a young Ron Jeremy in a Dirty Harry movie
Yeah,
before he got into adult movies or something. So,
it could
uh,
be, it could be.
but but yeah, so that sequence. The other thing, I don't know if you noticed this, but did you notice that the guy who played the pimp was the same guy who was "Do You Feel Lucky" punk at the bank robbery?
No, I didn't pick up on that
Yeah,
actually.
that
Oh,
is Albert Popwell, and he plays a new character in every. Maybe not the fifth movie, but in 1 through 4, he plays a new character, and he kind of gets upgraded. Like his roles get more and more important as they go on,
okay.
and
I'll keep my eyes
yeah.
open in the future then.
It's a
But
wonderful thing for like fanfic if you want to like write like a fanfic about I don't know the quadruplets who are all these different characters in the Dirty Harry movies.
yeah, no, but yeah, he's good in both movies. So I'm
And
looking
it's
forward
also
to
got
seeing.
this movie has the Drano scene, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
which comes up in other films. That's one of the reasons why that's notable. And apparently that's another one of the scenes that kind of pissed off John Milius, because in his original script that wasn't actually on screen. That was just mentioned when they're in the morgue, but in the movie they actually show it. And he thought it was more effective to not show it and to just have them mention it.
Yeah, well, also the way they mentioned it too. It wasn't that like basically, yeah, when the guy it was when the pimp himself was in the morgue.
Yeah.
Harry uh, mentions that one of his girls was found a few weeks ago with the Drano. So, yeah, I mean, I think from a storytelling standpoint, it means that you're giving some characterization motivation to Harry too at that point, whereas that kind of gets lost by taking the story and moving it somewhere else. But yeah, I don't know, but that really isn't something that was of all the things I'm going to complain about in this movie, that was a minor one for me.
Well, and overall, I thought that scene was good. The woman who played the prostitute,
yeah,
what was her
it was
name?
done well. I don't have a problem with the scene aside from it. Well, I mean, it's an unpleasant scene, no question.
No, it's definitely, but it's very well acted. Like Margaret Avery played the prostitute, and what I liked about her was she only had a few short moments to convey the personality of this character, and she really convinced me of like a much deeper personality that just from like, you know what I mean? And I thought Albert Popwell did a really good job, like when he's not convinced that she's giving him all of his money, just the expressions on his face and all of that. He just had like a
no, that whole scene, there's just a lot of drama. You feel like there's a backstory there. It's like, I mean, it really works. And I mean, I was wondering if the character would be important in the movie from that standpoint.
Yeah,
but no, both
shot.
Are dead very quickly and soon.
It's the scene that didn't work for me the most actually is a really odd one. It's the Chinese food eating scene where what was the criminal's name? Palancio? I can't remember.
I've forgotten now. I actually saw this a few days ago, so I'm a little.
Yeah, I wish. Hold on, let me see if they got his Palancio, Frank Palancio. So Frank Palancio, he's taking these little dainty bites of the food, and it just doesn't. That's not how you eat that kind of food. It just didn't. It didn't work for me. That is one of the most.
That's an acting thing.
Yeah, it really bothered me.
Too much food in your mouth. Yeah, that's what he was doing.
That's what he was doing. It really bothered me that he was taking these little itty bitty pieces of the food and eating it that way.
No, I mean it's a trick that works great on stage if you're on stage because no one can see how much food you're stuffing in your mouth. But I actually didn't catch that. I wasn't paying attention to that.
I only noticed it like the second time I watched it. You know, it was like but it did bother me.
It's to avoid getting a scene like the steward of Gondor in the Return of the King, where he's eating the tomatoes. That's what you're trying to avoid by having the dainty bites.
Well, I feel like they can just edit around, like show them taking mouthfuls and then edit it to them with a clean mouth if they're worried about that. But it's just like that's not how you eat. I don't know if he was eating lo mein or what, but it just didn't. He wasn't eating it right.
They probably ordered that food 3 hours before. And it was like sitting there on the set, so that would be another reason to want to take dainty bites.
It's a good point. The other thing that I think is noteworthy is. There is something to be said for movies that were made before power steering was really a thing, and they have chase scenes, and you have these big giant wheels, and you really have to put the work into spinning the wheel.
No question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the fact, too, that, I mean, back then, at least car chases were car chases. They weren't CGI, because CGI car chases rarely work. You just don't have that
impact.
Feel. I mean, it's like, it's funny because by the end of the 80s, I just hated car chases because they were so omnipresent for my entire lifetime that I never want to see. But now when I see an old car chase, I'm like, wow, this is great. Just the physicality. It's like, take it in moderation. You just can't beat an old 70s, 80s car chase.
A good car chase can really work. And, this one has some good ones. And I think, and like you said, when you're so used to things being CGI and then you go back and you have this really great, just real car chase scene, and it might look a little bit hokey to people because of the way it's, they're not filmed in a very stylishly edited way. But one benefit of not filming them that way is you can see everything that's happening. When they're they're not pulling these tricks where it's like a really fast close-up shot of something and then you can see more of the actual movement of the vehicles and what the vehicle is actually doing. And you feel like there's less wool being pulled over your eyes as a result. I like and again, according to Milius, he didn't want those chase scenes in there. This was not meant to be that type of a movie.
From what I read, it was the final. Yeah, well, it
The
was covered
final one.
generally just one. The final one was the big one. The whole aircraft carrier scene. I think he had a completely. He wanted a more dramatic ending, not a big.
I have to say, I agree with
ending.
him. That was a pretty lame, as Dirty Harry movies go.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I found the conclusion boring to an extent.
Yeah.
It just wasn't compared to the typical action of these movies. It was weak, and also the abrupt ending didn't work for me in this movie. It's like it wasn't like it ruined it, but it's like, I going back to the throwing away the badge thing. It's like that just put this punctuation mark on the end of the movie, and the movie was done. Whereas here, it's like, okay, he just shot a whole bunch of cops, and what happens now? And, it's over.
Yeah, and
it felt too abrupt for me.
And it was weird too. I feel like that scene could have been better because the whole thing is he's not really dealing with the cops with guns, if I remember. Like he's dealing with them with his bare hands at a certain point. He literally bashes. That would have been cool if they really highlighted the savagery of it. Do you know what I mean? Like if there was something where it's like. Because number one, it would kind of tie back to the first movie where we're seeing this emotional crossing of the line and we're getting back to the character. Like, okay, there is something broken about this guy. There is something going on. But also, it would have been very personal for him. Do you know what I mean? It would have been like...
there was no emotional heft to anything in that final scene. I mean, I was just like, okay, he's going to... How's he going to kill everybody? And and there was a cute little trick he did with Hal Holbrook at the end was kind of fun, but
it's that.
But taking out the guys in the squad just felt kind of perfunctory to me. I just wasn't very involved in it.
And the thing is, because you're kind of already a little bored by the time the neat little trick happens, it's not even that. You're just kind of like, okay, can we get this over with? So
it's kind of funny. It's like I was ready for the movie to be over, but it also still didn't feel complete. So it was kind of had problems in both ways. I enjoyed the movie overall to the point that the weak ending, I still felt pretty good about the movie when it was done. It was just like, all right.
I think the movie is interesting in that number one, it's like it's a nice, interesting, fun cop movie, and it's entertaining in a lot of ways, and it's over the top. And it has some interesting conversation pieces in it in relation to the first movie. And it's got some, scenes that are kind of like double take scenes. You're like, oh, did that guy just do that sort of a thing? And it has these, like, again, that Charlie McCoy character when he first shows up, that performance just, I don't know why I love it, but it's like, I remember I had a bitter, family member who was kind of like that. He wasn't a cop or anything, but he just was one of these people that was angry at the world and would go on these rants. And it just felt like that type of person who was like, this guy is unhinged. He's ready to, it really worked. But the last part of the movie, I think, is the weakest part. That chase scene doesn't work. And I don't know. I feel like the time for him to confront those guys is when they were in the parking lot trying to recruit him. I feel like that would have been a better moment, or soon after, like things immediately go crazy as soon as Hal Holbrook shows up and there's a big something. I don't know, something that it just felt too long. And I think too, the only part that I did like about that final sequence is the way that Hal Holbrook goes from cleaning off his glasses to pulling out his gun. Something about that transition I always find amusing, but that's about all that I enjoy in that scene. And also, it's so painfully obvious that it's Hal Holbrook at that point. I feel like there should have been more red herrings in there. So there just wasn't enough distraction thrown in or something. I don't know.
I agree. And I mean, well, as I said, I feel the whole character is kind of a mess in the way it was written. I think you really need to redo that character.
Get used to that. Get used to that as we watch the series.
Well, I was going to say my final thought. Well, I guess I'm jumping to final thoughts here, I guess. But my big concluding thought on this one, we can continue afterwards, but just to get it out of the way, is that well, I'll save it, actually. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, like, from here on out, Dirty Harry is a very inconsistent character from movie to movie, but that almost becomes the point of the series of what are we gonna? And they almost play. And I think in the reason I like the third movie is they're more artful in how they play with that, if that makes sense. Where they take him and they present him in a certain way and they allow him to evolve over the course of the movie. And I found that a little more interesting than this film, where it's like, well, wait, why is he even against these guys? What's the, like, okay, I can see why he's against these guys, I guess, but what does that now mean? Like, it just, there's something that's just never quite fully believable about his opposition to these characters, given what he was doing in the first movie. And I think that might be down to, I went and I looked at the original quote by Siegel that I tried to mention last episode. I actually got it way wrong. What he was saying in that quote was, it seems like there was maybe a conflict of vision about what Dirty Harry was between him and Clint Eastwood, possibly. Yeah. But what he was essentially saying is, Dirty Harry is, you're not supposed to think that any of the things he's doing in that movie is good. He's basically like the scene where he says, where he says that Scorpio likes killing, and they're like, well, how do you know? Or something like that. And he walks away. It's because Dirty Harry likes killing. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the, you're not supposed to, it's not supposed to be a good thing, the direction he's going. And in this movie, they have to backtrack so much. But but the problem is, they still have to keep him as that character, because that's what's interesting about him. Do you know what I mean? So like, they backtrack, but they don't suck that out of the character, and then it becomes confusing. Does that make sense?
No, that makes total sense. They're trying to do two things at once.
Yeah,
it's pretty clear to me. It's
so it's a mess in that respect, but it's a lot of fun in other ways. There's this team of rookie cops that are going around just slaughtering bad guys in ways that are kind of ridiculous. Like, the first scene, okay, like, there's a guy named Scarza who gets, number one, that scene where Scarza gets off from the trial where he murdered somebody and everybody's outraged. Yeah. When was the last time anybody was outraged about a mafia murder? Right? Like
that didn't make any sense to me either. I'd forgotten, because that was the beginning of the movie. It slipped my mind. But that was my exact thought. It's like, what is going on? Because
people were angry.
If it was a child murderer or something like that, I could see a crowd out there being angry. But people, it's just like, whatever.
And so Scarza gets off. I forget if his name was Scarza or if the person he killed was Scarza. Oh, it was Rika. Rika was the guy who gets killed, and Scarza is the person he murdered, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right.
So that scene is at least a little bit believable, because it's one cop pulling over a car and then he shoots everybody. But then the second one, he goes up to a party at a mansion, presumably all criminals, if I remember. And he just starts machine gunning down everybody. And there are houses all over the place. You can see the neighbors. And he throws a smoke bomb that explodes into the pool. It's not at all low key. And there's no way there weren't witnesses that saw this cop, But again,
I thought they were. I mean, I was never clear on who those people were. But if they're organized crime, it's like, you're counting on the fact that none of them are armed or have security, and there's one of you is going to go up there alone and start shooting. It just seems like a really good way to die.
And he did have a high-powered weapon, but I mean, still, it was obvious that if one person in that scene had a gun, they could have pulled it out and shot at him, and
hitting all those people, even with a high-powered weapon, is I mean, it's not impossible, but it's a lot to count on.
No, it is. But I will say it was an entertaining sequence. And the same with So it's that kind of a movie where it's totally ridiculous but very entertaining. There's the scene in the store where they're staking out because the store's been robbed a bunch of times, and then the robbers show up, the three salty dudes, and that scene actually had a little bit of power to it. That scene was like maybe one of the scenes that kind of reminded me more of the first movie, where it's really.
I agree on that. Yeah. That did feel edgier than a lot of the movie.
It felt edgier. It connected the first movie. You get this real sense of this dystopian world that Harry feels he's living in, where criminals are just taking over the streets. And that was one of those scenes where it's like criminals are taking over the streets, and then there's all these added racial elements that are thrown in because the cop, Dirty Harry's new partner, is black, and the guy, one of the salty dudes, is definitely not down with black people, it seems. And so there's this whole tense interaction between them, and it just, I don't know, the rest of the criminals that they're dealing with in the movie are all mobsters, and that's not the kind of criminal you think of when you think of people being imperiled because the streets are overrunning with crime, if that makes sense. It just felt like, oh, this is like glamorous crime that they're dealing with. They're not dealing with like crime where there's like, innocent people being killed in the streets type of a thing.
We were dealing, like, the bad guys in this movie were either, like you say, high profile criminals, or they were cops that were bad guys. And either way, it creates, you're in a whole different environment than what you're thinking about in the first one.
But so there was that one scene, but again, that one scene kind of feels like out of place in the course of the whole movie. You know what I mean? It feels like it belongs in like there was another script that involved none of the other stuff that happened in the movie, and that's like the one part that remained. You know what I mean?
Survive. Yeah, exactly.
So, but I don't know. Any final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about all the flaws in this movie, it's a movie that's enjoyable enough, even with its flaws. You don't feel like you wasted your time watching it. When you're done, because it's got all these flaws, there's so much to talk about. It's like you can enjoy it and pick it. So.
That's a good way to put it. The movie, as I said, they're very well grounded criticisms of this movie, but the flaws that are criticized are the things that make it so easy to talk about. So it's like it's hard to watch this movie and not have a long conversation with people afterwards. Exactly.
So I think it's a win-win on that point. It's just the right amount of good and bad.
And it's such a bizarre plot too, like this death. It
is weird. Yeah,
I will say the one thing I liked about that is my final thought is I thought selecting the motorcycle cops as the guys to represent like the emerging like fascist vigilante force or unit was perfect, because motorcycle cops have so much gear that they have to wear, and they have to wear leather and all this stuff, that it really fit the whole, these guys are like fascist type, where it wouldn't have worked with a car cop as much, or you know what I mean, like
it would have felt really different.
But these guys have the sunglasses, they got the little helmet, they got the gear, they got everything, just sort of feels very militaristic, and I thought that it worked. So I thought that they were like cool bad guys, and it just kind of like, it's almost one of these things where it's like, it's a really great concept. It's just that it wasn't done
to its best potential.
So the good news is the next movie is about women on the police force, and so we get to see Harry contend with a, and I'll spill the beans. He gets a female partner. That's the big thing that happens in the next movie. So which I don't know, you'll if we get to it, you'll get to make your own mind up about it, but I think it's a little more interesting because in these two movies we're dealing with, Harry is given, like, he has a black partner in this movie, and he has, I think, like a Mexican partner in the first movie, and all they're trying to establish basically is that he's okay with people like that. Do you know what I mean? That he's not racist or anything. And in the third movie, they kind of go the different direction, where it's like, no, Harry's not okay with having the female partner, and that produces a lot of the dramatic elements of the film, and I don't know, just and a lot of the chemistry arises out of that. So if and when we get to it, we'll comment on it then. But so the movie it's called Magnum Force is the name of the movie. It's the second Dirty Harry film. I think it was originally going to be called something else. It was originally going to be called like Vigilante or Vigilantes or something like that. But I think they used Magnum Force just so that it was obvious that it was a Dirty Harry, that it was connected to the Dirty Harry film. So I guess we'll head out, and until next time, we will talk to you later.